I'm Rowan.
I'm 23, I'm gender fluid, and for the past year I've been earning my living as a resident domestic worker in a private home. For me, this life wasn't a fallback, a joke, or a temporary experiment. It was the destination my heart kept steering me toward, even when everything about my upbringing suggested I was supposed to become someone else entirely.
I didn't come into the world as Rowan.
I was born Daniel Carter Reed, the only child of a prosperous family with money, influence, and a very specific plan for my future.
My childhood was polished and tightly managed.
I went to expensive schools, wore the right clothes, said the right things, and eventually entered a top university to study finance and business policy. To everyone around me, my future seemed obvious. I would graduate, join my father's development firm, and one day inherit the company he had spent years turning into a regional powerhouse.
That was the script everyone else believed in.
But deep down, something in me resisted it with a force I could never quite explain. For as far back as I can remember, I carried a private longing that made no sense to anyone around me and barely made sense to me. It wasn't a passing curiosity or some childish game. It was enduring, emotional, and strangely powerful. More than anything, I wanted to exist in the role of a woman doing domestic work. I wanted the clothes, the routine, the order, the service, the quiet usefulness of it. I wanted the structure of maintaining a home.
I wanted the feeling of being needed in that particular way. I tried for years to bury it. I told myself it was embarrassing.
I told myself it was irrational. I told myself it would disappear once I got older, once university got harder, once my adult life properly began.
But denying it never made it fade. If anything, suppression gave it more strength.
Each time I pushed it down, it resurfaced with even greater clarity. I've always been drawn to women, without confusion and without apology.
But my attraction was never the whole story.
Alongside it lived another feeling, something more complicated and more intimate, admiration so intense it sometimes felt like identification. I noticed the way women moved through space, the clothes they wore, the confidence or softness they carried into different roles. And nothing affected me more deeply than seeing a woman dressed for housework. Aprons, work dresses, cleaning gloves, simple shoes, pinned hair, the unglamorous rhythm of daily labor. It all had an almost magnetic effect on me.
I didn't just want to look at it. I wanted to step inside it. My parents could not have been less alike.
My father, Gregory Reed, was the sort of man who entered a room and instantly made it his territory. He was broad-shouldered, commanding, absolutely certain of his own judgment, and accustomed to being obeyed. He spoke with finality, as if every opinion had already been approved by some invisible higher authority. People outside the family called him charismatic. At home, he was simply immense, his mood, his voice, his expectations. He was never openly cruel to my mother, and because of that I spent years assuming their marriage must be fine.
He was polite to her.
Generous, even. But politeness and tenderness are not the same thing, and I would only understand that later. My mother, Evelyn, moved through life in an entirely different register. She was quiet where he was forceful, reflective where he was practical, and more interested in novels, cinema, and ideas than in schedules or household logistics. She spent hours reading essays, attending cultural events, and disappearing into conversations about art that went far over my head when I was younger. As a child, I thought she was absent-minded. As an adult, I realized she had learned to survive by retreating inward. And yet the real center of our home wasn't my father or my mother. It was Celia. Celia was our live-in housekeeper, a woman from overseas who had worked for our family for many years. She was in her 30s when I first began to see her not just as part of the house, but as the person who actually held it together. I must have been around 14 when my attention shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. I watched her constantly, but not with the vague curiosity of a teenager noticing an adult. It was more aching than that, more personal. I watched her because she represented a life that stirred something deep inside me. She was competent in a way I found mesmerizing. Calm, steady, endlessly capable. Before leaving her home country, she had trained in healthcare, but like many women seeking better opportunities abroad, she had taken on domestic work to support relatives back home. She had children she rarely saw, an old marriage behind her, and the sort of resilience that never announced itself. My mother had little interest in managing the mechanics of the household, so Celia did nearly everything. She cooked, cleaned, organized, shopped, handled laundry, kept supplies stocked, and somehow made a large 2-story house run smoothly day after day without drama.
I admired her more than I admired anyone.
If I'm honest, admiration isn't even a strong enough word. I envied her role. I yearned toward it. The only part that disappointed me, in a strangely specific way, was that she didn't wear a formal uniform. My parents were the kind of people who insisted on that sort of display, and Celia herself preferred comfort over ceremony. Instead of black and white maid outfits, she wore loose house dresses in cheerful prints, usually lightweight cotton, practical for long hours of work. Over them she tied broad aprons that protected the fabric while she cooked or cleaned. The effect was simple and old-fashioned, more homemaker than servant, but to me it was still deeply compelling. She looked efficient, grounded, and real. Then the life I had always known cracked open. It happened on a cool morning in early spring, a day I can still replay moment by moment. I was 22, and nearing the end of university. We had just finished breakfast when my father announced, with surprising bluntness, that he was leaving the house. Not later that month. Not after a period of discussion. That day. He said someone would come by for the rest of his things, and that my mother would explain the details afterward. He lifted a small travel bag, walked out, and shut the door behind him with almost unbelievable finality. That was it. No argument at the table. No grand emotional scene. Just departure. Later, my mother told me what had been going on. He had been involved with a woman from his office for quite some time. According to her, the marriage had been hollow for years, and his exit was less of a shock than the conclusion of a story she'd already finished grieving in private. She told me this with remarkable calm. He had left the house to us, arranged generous financial support, and ensured that the household expenses, including Celia's wages, would continue to be covered. My mother also had family money of her own, so there was no immediate fear about how we would live. I expected anger. Instead, what I felt most was relief. I had never been comfortable around my father, not truly. I always sensed that I disappointed him in ways he didn't bother to describe. I was slim like my mother, smaller framed than he would have liked, with softer features that had attracted comments all through school. People called me handsome sometimes, but just as often they called me pretty, and I hated how sharply that word seemed to clash with what my father believed a son should be. After he left, my mother and I sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels unfamiliar because a certain tension has suddenly vanished from the air. Then she did something unexpected. She stood, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms around me. She had never been especially affectionate, not physically, so the gesture startled me more than my father's announcement had. "We're going to be all right, Danny," she said softly. "Honestly, I think this house may finally feel lighter now." I looked at her and realized she meant it. "So do I said. And for the first time, I truly did. From that day forward, the atmosphere in our home changed almost immediately. The heaviness dissolved. Rooms that once felt monitored began to feel lived in. My mother transformed the most. A brightness returned to her that I hadn't seen in years. She laughed more. She teased Celia. She lingered over meals instead of hurrying through them. It was as if she had been holding her breath for a decade and had finally exhaled. A few days later, another quiet shift took place. Celia stopped calling my mother Mrs. Reed and began calling her Evelyn. It was a small change on the surface, but it marked a new intimacy between them, an easing of old formal boundaries. Then came the morning that changed my life completely. The three of us were finishing breakfast together. Celia still cooked and served, but now she also sat down with us afterward, which alone would have been unthinkable before. My mother looked at me over her tea and said, in a tone so casual it nearly disguised the weight of the question, "Would you like to help Celia with the housework?" I stared at her. She continued, "This house is too large for one person to manage alone, even if she manages it brilliantly. And you seem restless. You go to lectures, you submit assignments, but your spirit is somewhere else." I felt my entire face go hot. Her words had struck a hidden nerve with absurd precision. Before I could answer, Celia gave me a half-smile and said, "You wouldn't hate it, Danny. In fact, I think you'd like it far too much." My mother set down her cup. "And since we're speaking honestly," she added, "Celia tells me you've kept some clothing tucked away in your wardrobe. Items that might suddenly become relevant." My pulse seemed to stop. I managed, "You went through my things?" Celia laughed. I cleaned your room. I didn't conduct an investigation. My mother's expression was gentle, not mocking. I've known for a long time that there are parts of you you've been afraid to name. That doesn't frighten me. It never did. Something in me gave way then. All the secrecy, all the years of careful self-editing, all the internal rehearsals of denial, they collapsed in the face of being seen and not rejected. So, I told the truth. I admitted that domestic work fascinated me, that watching Celia clean, cook, sort, and restore order made me feel calm in a way almost nothing else did, that the clothing mattered to me, too, that I had imagined myself in those roles more times than I could count. Instead of recoiling, my mother smiled with unmistakable relief.
Then learn, she said.
Help her. Let her teach you properly. Celia was even more direct. Go upstairs. Put on the blue work dress in the back of your closet, the one with the pale apron. Wear sensible shoes. Then come down, and we'll begin. They said it as if it were the most natural next step in the world. I searched their faces for hesitation and found none. My mother simply said, "Clothes don't erase who you are. If this helps you feel more like yourself, then stop punishing yourself for it." That was all I needed. I went upstairs so quickly, I nearly ran. As I climbed the stairs, I had the unmistakable sense that the two of them had discussed this long before that breakfast. Under any other circumstance, I might have been embarrassed by that. In that moment, I was too overwhelmed by anticipation to care. When I came back down, the kitchen was full of ordinary sounds, water running, dishes being stacked, the soft thud of movement against cabinets. Celia turned when I entered and looked me over with open approval. "Well," she said, smiling broadly, "you look entirely believable." I felt shy and exhilarated at once. "I feel settled," I admitted, "like something in me has finally stopped fighting." She nodded, then became briskly practical. "A couple of things. First, the fit can be improved. Second, you need another name. You can't do this as Danny." I had never dared choose one for myself. Celia considered me for a moment, then said, "What about Rowan?"
"I once knew someone by that name. It would suit you."
The name landed in me instantly, as if it had been waiting there all along. "Yes," I said. "That's the one." And just like that, Rowan began. Training started immediately. Celia believed in order, standards, and routine. The kitchen came first always. Surfaces had to be spotless, dishes properly dried, supplies returned to their places, floors checked, bins emptied, towels changed. Bathrooms followed. Then bedrooms, laundry, dusting, polishing, shopping lists, linens, cupboards, guest areas. There was a system for everything and a reason behind every sequence. She handed me a cloth and cleanser and told me not to think of the work as drudgery. "Think of it as restoring harmony," she said. I took that seriously. What followed was not some overnight fantasy made real in a single dramatic moment. It was gradual, layered, and surprisingly disciplined. I learned the routines. I adjusted my posture, my grooming, my movements. I built a practical wardrobe of work dresses, aprons, and comfortable shoes. In the house, I addressed my mother respectfully and referred to Celia with the formality she preferred during work hours. Day after day, the roles stopped feeling like dress-up and started feeling like truth. I wasn't pretending to be Rowan. I was Rowan. My mother blossomed in her new freedom. She began hosting small evenings again, readers, lecturers, old friends from artistic circles. I moved quietly through those gatherings, serving drinks, clearing plates, and maintaining the calm elegance of the house. In crisp uniforms and careful presentation, I became nearly invisible in the most satisfying way. Guests saw a poised young domestic worker, not the person they might once have known as Evelyn Reed's child. I preferred it that way. There was peace in being recognized by my function rather than my history. Peace in competence. Peace in the rituals of care. Our home settled into a new rhythm built not on expectation, but on honesty. My mother reclaimed joy. Celia became not merely an employee, but her trusted companion. And I devoted myself to the work that had called to me for years, not as a shameful secret, but as a chosen life. This is the life I live now. And for the first time, I am exactly where I belong.